It is the year 0079 of the Universal Century. Half a century has passed since Earth began moving its burgeoning population into gigantic orbiting space colonies. A new home for mankind, where people are born and raised and die. 9 months ago, the cluster of colonies furthest from the Earth, called Side 3, proclaimed itself the Principality of Zeon and launched a war of independence against the Earth Federation. Initial fighting lasted over 1 month and saw both sides lose half their respective populations. People were horrified by the indescribable atrocities that had been committed in the name of independence. 8 months had passed since the rebellion began. They were at a stalemate. There is no doubt in my mind that the single most important story within the entire franchise of Mobile Suit Gundam is the 1 Year War. It set the standard for what Gundam is, and there's a plethora of stories in anime, manga, and video games that go over exactly what happened to the main cast of the original show, plus soldiers fighting on both sides of the conflict. So, over the next few weeks, we'll be discussing each of the main anime that takes place during the 1 Year War. This week, we're headed to the jungle as we discuss the 08th MS Team. So, the 08th MS Team is an interesting beast. It's a series that has sort of a weird reputation that I feel is a little bit deceptive. It sort of gets portrayed as Gundam Vietnam, but I think that description gives the wrong impression about what you're going to get when you dive into this particular OVA. Let's go ahead and get the technical stuff out of the way first, though. So then we can talk about all the fun thematic bits and spoiler stuff later on. So one thing that I do need to mention is that the order of this particular series on the 1 Year War was actually decided by you guys. From here on in, though, polls about what to do next aren't going to be done in community posts. Instead, that'll be left to people who subscribe to the Patreon and Subscribestar. So, if you want to get in on that action, plus get your name mentioned in the credits of each episode, use the links in the description to snag yourself a tier and support the channel today. So, let's go ahead and get the technical stuff out of the way, like I mentioned. The 08th MS Team is a story about what it was like to be on the ground level of the 1 Year War. It follows a team of mobile suit pilots that are deployed in the jungles of Southeast Asia. In this region, there are several teams that are deploying a type of Gundam called the Ground-type Gundam, the technical designation of this mobile suit being the RX-79G. It's sort of a middle ground between the original RX-78 that Amuro Ray piloted, and then the mass production GIM. The story specifically follows Ensign Shiro Amada, the commander of the 08th team, and Aina Sahalin, who is of a noble family from Zeon. On Shiro's side of the story, it shows his struggles to command the 8th team and its, let's just say unique personalities as a cohesive unit. This, of course, is on top of maneuvering civilian aspects of Southeast Asian warfare and the guerrilla villages, while simultaneously trying to fight Zeon. As for the lovely Miss Sahalin, her story largely surrounds her troubled relationship with her psychotic scientist military leader brother, and his development of a massive mobile armor called the Apsaris, or as I'm going to call it, the Absolus, because in the English dub, that's what it's called, and the Japanese alphabet doesn't have the letter L, so yeah. Even though this is a ground pounder series, she and Shiro actually meet in space. The story begins with Aina testing a Zaku mobile suit that's customized and seems to be a test bed for what would eventually become the Gelgoog later on in the war. She's kicking the crap out of Chief Petty Officer Terry Sanders, who would later become part of Shiro Amada's team. Shiro comes to his rescue in a ball of all things, and the two fight to a stalemate. In the end, Shiro essentially has Aina dead to rights in a wrecked Federation cruiser during a gunfight, only to spare her and to actually form a bit of a bond with her for reasons that he can't quite explain. From there, the two separate into their aforementioned stories. The series' direction and writing were split into 2 parts, though that wasn't the original intention. The first 6 episodes are directed by Takayuki Kanda, who is known for co-directing The Ultraman, which is the first, I believe, Ultraman anime. And then he directed Metal Armor Dragonrar, but more notably, the Votom's spin-off Armor Hunter Mellowlink. The first half was then written by Akira Oyeka, who worked with Gundam creator Yoshiyuki Tamino on Victory Gundam. Sadly, Kanda, the director, passed away in a car crash. A new team was brought on to write and direct after that, with Devilman OVA director Umanosuke Ida taking over on direction duties, and the writing was done by Dagwan and Escaflowne veteran Hiroaki Kitajima. The music is beautifully composed by Kohei Tanaka, who did the music for G Gundam, Gunbuster, and Gao Gai Gar. A lot of G's in there. As for the voice acting, it's good on both ends. I can't really say anything bad about it. Now, obviously I prefer the English dub because I don't like reading subtitles, as I've said over and over again, but I have watched this in both languages, oddly enough. There's a couple notable things about Shiro Amada's VA in both English and Japanese, though, because both VAs are well known in mecha circles. In Japanese, Shiro's voiced by Nobuyuki Hiyama, who is the voice of Gai Shishio from The King of Braves Gao Gai Gar. In fact, it's probably his most famous role. But he also did Brave Express Mike Gein's Maito Senfuji. So essentially he's known for voicing 2 out of the several Braves. For you fighting game fans, he's also the voice of Joe Higashi from Fatal Fury. As for the English VA for Shiro, he's voiced by Steve Staley, though he's credited as Steve Cannon. He's also the only English voice actor I can think of that one-ups Brad Swale for Gundam pilots he voiced. In fact, he might have voiced more than anybody that I can think of. You see, Steve has voiced 4 Gundam pilots. Aside from Shiro Amada, he's also the voice of Banager Lynx from Gundam Unicorn, Seabook Arno from Gundam F91, and McGillis Farid from Iron-Blooded Orphans. I might have to do some research, but I think that tops it. But feel free to let me know in the comments if there's another voice actor that has voiced that many Gundam pilots. The only other one that I can think of that comes close, aside from Brad Swale, is over in the Japanese side of things, with Takahito Koyasu. For those of you who don't know who that is, he is the voice of... That's all you need to know. As you'd expect from an OVA series, the animation is smooth as hell. The character design still has that Gundam feel, but the environments and color palette are much more grounded. A lot of the Federation mobile suits have very earthy and subdued tones to their colors, whereas the Zeon suits still maintain the bright and flashy colors that Kunio Okawara gave them in the original anime. Though, some of them have been dirtied up because they've been in several conflicts. Now granted, it makes sense that they would still have that vibrancy, since Okawara actually did some of the mecha design in these OVAs. Along with Hajime Katoki, who did Victory Gundam, Gundam Unicorn, and then worked with Okawara on G Gundam and Gundam Wing. For those of you who don't know who Katoki is, aside from that, if you have ever seen a Gunpla called a Ver-Ka kit, that is his redesign of that particular mobile suit, just so you know. They're my favorites to build. I'm actually working on the Double Zeta right now. On top of those two, they also worked with Gundam Seed Stray designer Kimotishi Yamana, and he's the one who designed the now iconic Gundam EZ-8. Now when you look at all the creators on this, you can tell that Sunrise really wanted to put their best foot forward with it. It's really emblematic of how seriously they take Gundam as a franchise. Except with Gundam Seed, I don't know what the fuck happened there. But anyway, they really did with this one. This show is fucking great. I can't really think of anything that's really negative about it now that I think about it. This is one of the most beloved Gundam shows by fans for a reason. Well, with that said, I do think something I mentioned earlier bears repeating and expanding upon. One thing that is pretty obvious from episode 7 onwards is that the writer and director change is pretty obvious. The first half of the show largely focuses on the ground war that the Federation has taken against Zeon, and has a very grounded feel, like many modern war stories. You can definitely tell it's directed by the same guy who did Armor Hunter Mellowlink. The second half is largely where we start to focus more on the story between Aina and Shiro, coming in and just taking precedence over anything else, which was the direction that the series was moving anyway. So in a weird way, the director shift kind of worked in its favor. They really got lucky there. But here's what I meant by the idea of this being Gundam Vietnam or something being super deceptive. This is not the Gundam version of something like Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, or something even more recent like Generation Kill. Now, I would absolutely fucking love to have a one-year war series that was tonally similar to those aforementioned stories. That would be awesome. But that's not what this is, though. To be frank, this is the Gundam version of Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, I know that sounds really weird, but in a way it actually does work. So Shiro Amada, as a soldier, has a very fucking good reason to hate Zeon. He's originally from Side 2, which was a colony that was gassed by Zeon. Real liberators of the colonies right there, folks. Fun fact, by the way, the person who gassed the colony is none other than Sima Garahao from 0083, Stardust Memory. And she was lied to by the Zeon brass and was told it was sleeping gas. Again, real liberators of the colonies right there. So open with their grunts. Very, very nice, guys. Nice job. GG. Anyway, seeing all that death and destruction left him with a big-time hatred of Zeon, so much so that he probably says Zeke with a hard R. Even so, his interactions with Aina make him realize that there's a human side to the war, and they become star-crossed lovers, like Romeo and Juliet. But basically what happens is that this makes him realize that not every Zeon pilot is the type of murderous zealot that Giran Zabi was a huge fan of. Looking at you, Ana Elgato, you fucking prick. Yeah, we're going to be talking about 0083 at some point, guys. Just be patient with me. Back on the human side of things, the thing that often makes us realize that our biases as people tend to be very one-sided is actually meeting someone from the other side of a conflict, or just on the other side of a prejudice, and realizing that they're just as human as we are. In a lot of ways, that's the moral of the story. Nobody in this particular OVA is attached to the highest levels of either military's command structure. They're not that favorable towards them. It doesn't really deal as much with the big movers and shakers in the war like the original Mobile Suit Gundam did. This specifically focuses on military operations in one theater of the war that is very detached from everything else. These folks are nowhere close to White Base and their hijinks. You get to see that soldiers by their nature are just as human as anybody else. Beyond whatever issues lie at the top of each military, the grunts can be absolute jerks and completely homicidal, or they can swing in the opposite direction and be incredibly noble and incredibly kind people. You even get the impression that some of the characters, given different circumstances, would be completely friendly if they weren't on opposite sides of this damn war. After that little rant of mine, I do need to stress that the tonal shift from the ground-pounding war to the more emotional aspects of this story is not a bad thing. In a weird way, all of the misfortune in regards to the production of this series ended up working in its favor, since you ended up with a writer and director in the second half that are very good with emotional complication and still were good with the same action and pacing that was present in the first half of the series. I have a feeling that behind the scenes, the creation and maintenance of this fucking show was absolutely chaotic because of the original director's death, but thankfully, not only did it work out in the end, we got one of the best Gundam series of all time. Okay. I think I've got the basic elements of this particular anime out of the way. I've been as vague as humanly possible. It's rather obvious I recommend this show. It's one of the best Gundam shows ever, yada yada yada. Given it's only 12 episodes, you can go watch it real quick and then come back to the spoiler section to discuss all the thematic elements with me. Since it's spoiler time, I imagine some of you probably thought to yourselves that I'm going to use the character of Kiki Rosita as my illustration for spoiler time. No, I'm not doing that. Do you want to know why? I'm pretty sure she's fucking underage. You know what that means! Instead, we'll have Miss Aina in a formal dress, since she looks so good in it. Wait, why did I call her Miss Aina? Oh god, I'm turning into Norris Packard. Well, maybe I'll get lucky and there's a Goof Custom out in my parking lot and I'll just use that instead of a car. Anyway, the one thing that I feel that this particular series does better than anything else is show a balance between both particular militaries in the one-year war. Now, I need to emphasize something. Even with the retcons that are present in Gundam Unicorn and Gundam Narrative, which, oh boy, when I get to those, I'm going to be doing some ranting. I still do not think that the mass genocides that Zeon put onto the Earth is something that you can just ignore. In fact, that's something that does a disservice to a lot of the things that Tamino was trying to get across from the original series. This is more of a conflict in this particular series in the 08MS team that's disconnected from the bigger parts of the war, and in my opinion, the more impactful parts of the war. The soldiers that are present within this aren't necessarily prioritizing the things that the bigwigs in either government are prioritizing. They just want to get home safely to their families and friends. In fact, that's a big part of the tension of the very last episode. The reason I think that Aina and Shiro's relationship makes sense and why it's not one of those anime relationships that makes you want to cringe out of your fucking skin is because they're very similar people. And they just meld together very well as characters. So, let me give an example of this and how their characters are so much the same in regards to the things that they prioritize as people. The series finale's plot largely revolves around the Absolus being used for the first time in open combat against Federation forces. Up to this point, the 08MS team has actually been hunting this thing, but this is the first time that it's actually been engaged in massive combat with a big force, which, boy oh boy, is this thing a powerhouse of a mobile armor. Especially for looking like it's just cobbled together from random Zaku parts. But anyway, when it comes right down to it, there is a huge fucking difference between how Aina is using the Absolus and then how her crazy fucking brother is using it. For Aina, she specifically just wants to get a hospital ship to get clear of the Earth, so that the people who worked so hard on this goddamn mobile armor can just go home to be with their families. So what does the head of the Federation forces in the area do? He orders a gym sniper to blow the fucking ship up. Essentially, it shows that the leadership of both sides of this region of conflict can be absolute shitheads. Because keep in mind, the people that worked so hard were worked to death by Aina's fucking brother, that cunt. And by the way, he basically kept them going with shitloads of stimulants. And then, on top of that, he poisoned a bunch of the scientists and engineers who were working on the project with him. War fucking sucks. Either way, it does serve to show Aina Sahalin's character. Yeah, she is a Zeon soldier, but she's by no means an evil person, or some sort of war criminal even. She and Shiro are just people trying to survive this war and just serve the people that are next to them, because they understand that being a soldier, a lot of that is camaraderie and taking care of the other people that are within the same situation that you are, because at the end of the day, you're going to rely on each other to survive. Like I mentioned earlier, if everyone had managed to survive the show, I imagine they'd probably be spotted at some restaurant after the war sharing beer and wings. Sadly, the rather awesome Norris Packard doesn't make it, even though he establishes himself as one of the most talented Zeon pilots in the whole fucking war. Holy shit, this guy is good. The Goof custom fight scene in the first part of the show's two-part finale, which is called The Shuddering Mountain, is fucking incredible. And Norris, as a character, he's just a great dude. He's obviously meant to be a parallel to Ramba Ral, but this is a guy who had his fucking mobile suit capable of activating on a goddamn voice command. The Goof custom is fucking dope, folks. Plus, in English, the guy is voiced by Michael McConey, I think is how you pronounce that last name. He's done a ton of anime in his career, but what I really want to emphasize is that he's the director from Crackdown, and he uses the exact same fucking voice as Norris Packard. It's fucking awesome. Sorry, I love this guy, and building the Goof custom was one of my favorite Gunpla experiences. I am a big fan of this character, and it really was a sad moment when he died. It was a big bummer. I was actually hoping he was going to make it through. Anyway, it's these sorts of themes that I think is why this particular show is able to have the staying power that it does. It absolutely still carries the theme of war sucking all copious types of ass, but it approaches it a little differently. Especially because at its core it's a love story. It really goes to show how futile in a lot of ways war can be as a concept, especially at a point where everybody has essentially driven each other insane, and the whole thing feels like it could have been prevented. One particular bit as a theme throughout anything regarding the 1 Year War is that you'll find as it goes on, and we look through all these series, it's oftentimes just carried by zealots. There's a big divide in regards to philosophy and approach from the people at the very top and the people at the very bottom. Then again, that's the tragedy of war. More often than not, even if you solve a conflict with military action, solve being thrown in air quotes, there's a good chance that that very action could end up causing another conflict later on, which is something that has just been a consistent theme throughout human history. The next thing you know, you're decades into the future still fighting the same battles because nothing got solved. Nothing was done well, and the pain is still there. Ultimately, Aina's brother is one of those zealots. He's driven more by his desire to destroy parts of the Federation and satisfy his own ego than he is any sort of camaraderie for the other people around him or love for country. Hell, he actually murders an admiral just for making him angry, even when that admiral, despite his crassness, was obviously a damn good leader. Then, of course, you have Shiro. In the separate OVA that came out later called Miller's Report, which I actually own a physical copy of, believe it or not, you can see that the investigation into Shiro's relationship with Aina is very slanted. Yeah, it's rather obvious that he carries a flame for a Zeon soldier. At the same time, there's no real reason to think he's a traitor. He's obviously a softie that's getting softer, but there's never really any indication that he's going to consider betraying the Federation. Plus, I'm not of the opinion that him becoming softer and the fuck up he makes in becoming a bit softer really needs further punishment. He gets punished for it, and he ends up with a permanent scar on his psyche that's really his own damn fault for not pulling the trigger properly. But then again, that's a lesson that a lot of soldiers learn in war. A more capable leader that was in charge of him would realize that, but I'm of the opinion that he doesn't have that many capable leaders around him. But anyway, like I said, no indication he's going to betray the Federation. But the thing is, he's treated with complete distrust, and he and his men are saddled with a suicide mission as punishment for a situation that really could not have been avoided. To fill in the blanks, Shiro got trapped in the mountains with Aina, and they did spend some intimate time together. I mean, they fucking bathed together, and it's implied they had sex. Thing is, that situation wasn't one that Shiro asked for. It's not like he and Aina planned a date in the mountains or some bullshit and they ended up in a cozy cabin together and they plotted a way to overthrow the military or some bullshit. If this was something planned, his Gundam would have never gotten fucked up. He was trapped in the mountains with her because one of his soldiers fucked up and he had to come in and save the day. A sensible person in the investigation would see that. But it doesn't really feel like anybody in this theater of operation for the Federation or Zeon are being sensible at this point. This is a conflict that sort of gives the long and short of what to expect from both the Federation military and the Zeon military. The Zeon military is largely run by zealots that think that genocide is an effective form of communication. The Federation side, on the other hand, is corrupt as hell, and they're very willing to throw grunts under the bus any chance they can get. In fact, I think the only grunt in a Gundam series that actually gets treated halfway decent by Federation higher-ups is Amuro Ray, but the only reason for that is because he's piloting the Gundam. If he was piloting anything else, they wouldn't give a rat's ass about him. Then again, that's the strength of this series in a nutshell. It's very much Romeo and Juliet, but it's a Romeo and Juliet taking place in a ground war in the jungle that feels very grounded, despite being an anime that can be a little over the top at times. In fact, I consider it to be one of the better romances within Gundam, and this is really one of the few romance stories you can actually get me to sit down and watch. It has so many compelling and interesting characters, plus a fair look on the 1 Year War, that I can't help but love it. It's one of my favorite Gundam series ever, possibly top 5. This is absolutely a must-watch. So if you have not watched the 08MS Team yet, go watch it. You can find this sucker on just about any streaming service that you want, both in English and Japanese, depending on what your preferences are. I cannot recommend it enough. Before we close out, once again, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, consider subscribing via Subscribestar on Patreon as well to support us. We're dealing with copyright issues that really hurt monetization in a lot of ways, so any support is very much appreciated, both from myself and Shirt Dude. Also, on top of that, if you're a comic book reader and you enjoy horror, head over to Indiegogo, check out my comic book 3 Nights, 4 Days, Part 2. Go ahead and pre-order a copy of the printing of that, plus the next printing of the first comic if you missed that on that as well. seriously, appreciate all you guys. Next time we come back with the 1 Year War, we'll be discussing the original Mobile Suit Gundam. Until that next time, my name is Micah Curtis, your favorite vanilla gorilla. Everybody have a great rest of your day. I'll see you on the next one.